Well, this one came out of nowhere, right? Intel is launching two budget-orientated graphics cards, the Arc B580 and B570. They've automatically caught our attention for two reasons. Number one, they're undercutting AMD and Nvidia in the sub-$300 market. Secondly, they're not skimping on VRAM. 12 gigs of memory is positively luxurious at B580's $250 price point, while Intel reckons performance is on average 10 percentage points ahead of the RTX 4060, an 8GB card that retails for $300, $220 USD for the 10GB B570. Not seen it yet, but the haircut to specs looks reasonable in terms of bandwidth, compute and VRAM. Could be a bit of a winner, especially if the perf differential is anything like A570 versus A770 from back in the day. Still, claims are one thing, real-world performance may well be another. The GPU itself, I'll keep this brief, but the reference card is excellent, extremely quiet in operation. It's a world apart from entry-level third-party cards for sure. There's one 8-pin PCIe power input, 3 display ports, one HDMI 2.1. So, a bit of background here. At Digital Foundry, we've been revamping our benchmarking behind the scenes, and I'm going to level with you. We weren't expecting new GPUs to arrive this soon. We have big plans for our hardware reviews, but you're only going to see a hint of them in this review. But we've got a new bunch of games, and we've automated benchmarks to varying degrees. So for the likes of Alan Wake 2 here, we've even made our own benchmark run, traversing a challenging area of the game. We've also moved away from video capture-based benchmarking in favour of NVIDIA FrameView, which is built on the open source Present mod, and this opens up a wealth of data. How about real-time tracking of power consumption from both PCIe slot and PCIe power cables? We can do that now. It's one thing to say that different GPUs may have similar performance levels, but what if one is drawing a ton more power than the other? Now we can visualize that. And if a game supports NVIDIA Reflex, developers have to introduce markers into the code. And this means that regardless of whether the game's running on an NVIDIA GPU or not, we can now track PC latency and plot it alongside performance. Automating benchmarks means we can do more interesting stuff too. It's typical just to bench everything at Ultra across the major resolutions, right? But should we be doing that for a $250 GPU? Well, for now we will be, but check this out, A Plague Tale Requiem at 4K resolution on the B580. Not exactly groundbreaking performance at native 4K Ultra, right? It's significantly faster if we switch to optimized settings, and those optimized settings, some draw distance tweaks apart, are very close to PlayStation 5 settings. So if we use those in combination with Asobo's reconstruction-based upscaler, used on consoles and creating a 4K image from a 1440p input, well, suddenly our $250 Intel GPU is outperforming consoles, and what is in PC terms a compelling 1080p GPU can actually do pretty well on a 4K screen. So yeah, by and large we will be using standard established methodology in this review, but ultimately we will be moving on to a more holistic view for this kind of product. For now at least, I think the Plague Tale example demonstrates that the benches we have today are good for highlighting performance differentials, but they probably won't be the way you'll likely be playing any of these games. And that's the issue we want to overcome going forward. Test system, 9800X3D, 6000 megatransfers per second CL30 memory, high-end Asus X87E motherboard. All of this isolates GPU performance, which is good, but again, in future, we're aiming to supplement reviews of a mainstream GPU with a mainstream PC being tested, because it kind of makes sense for the real-world experience, right? Still, with all of those caveats out of the way, let's crack on. As we are on Ultra, we're sticking with 1080p to keep frame rates in playable territory for the most part. But Intel actually talks about using the B580 for 1440p gaming. And I've got no problem with that. For selected titles, especially with optimized settings and with upscaling where appropriate, the B580 can definitely do the job. So with all of that out of the way, let's start with a quick look at ray tracing performance, which is important for Intel with the new Battlemage architecture. Alan Wake 2 here is configured to maximum raster settings but low RT. Low because everything else is using path tracing. Remedy is taking no prisoners here, but even low RT is pretty sweet, with reflections and transparency reflections with a quality level that exceeds the RT on PS5 Pro. All told, B580 is the fastest card here by a country mile, 29% clear of RTX 4060, 51 points clear of RX 7600. Brutal stuff, and I'm here for it. The caveat being frame time spikes on B580 that can max at 100 milliseconds, and those present as obvious stutter. It's not there on Nvidia, but does seem to impact AMD. Avatar Frontiers of Pandora is interesting. There are 3 parts to this benchmark. Throughout, 4060 and B580 are battling it out, delivering broadly similar performance, while the 3060 and RX 7600 are left way behind. RX 7600 is the card exhibiting frame time issues this time around, and it's also the least performant of the bunch, as you might imagine. Dying Light 2 on high ray tracing, another B580 win, 14% ahead of 4060, 38 points clear of 3060, 51% to the better versus RX 7600. All for $250 and with 12 gigs of VRAM. Now let's talk F124 with all RT features on, and there are certainly a lot of them. Intel actually issued a driver update to sort frame time issues, which I'll talk about shortly, but not in this game. But yeah, well, B580, 3 points clear of 4060, 24% ahead of 3060, and remarkably it's 3xing the RX 7600. Kudos to Codemasters for really pushing ray tracing here. Everything on, native resolution, maximum settings, a 63 FPS average on Arc B580. Metro Exodus excelled on Arc A770 and A750 back in the day, and so it is here with another market-leading performance. We've got a 58 FPS average on Arc at extreme settings, which is kinda nuts to be honest, with a 16 percentage point lead over the RTX 4060, rising to 39 points ahead of the 3060, and an almost cosmic 77% increase in performance over RX 7600. There's no XeSS support here though, unfortunately. I really need to look more closely into the DLSS modding situation for upscaling solutions like XeSS, kind of retrofitting XeSS back into games that never supported it. A Plague Tale Requiem's RT Shadows next. Yeah, this one sees B580 beat 4060 handily in raster performance, as you'll see a bit later on, and this accumulates into RT as well. A 23-point lead over 4060, rising to 40% over 3060 and rising again to a 2.4x performance multiplier over RX 7600. The only downer is, once again, no XeSS support. That said, Asobo's own upscaler is pretty good. So look, even maxing everything out like a madman, B580 is running ray tracing well at 1080p without using any upscaling. From my perspective, this is a major win for a $250 product. I'm genuinely thrilled to see this kind of competition in a market where, and well, let's face facts here, everyone just buys Nvidia anyway if the Steam hardware survey is to be believed. Ray tracing requires more RAM typically, and you're getting that, and you're getting great ray tracing performance. The one fly in the ointment during my testing, Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales, whether you're using RT or no RT, the frame times are atrocious. Intel talks about having sorted its driver issues, but well, I've got lingering doubts still. Let's move on to raster performance, and I'll try to keep things brief because we're getting very, very close to the embargo now. There's effective parity between 4060 and B580 in this one, but interestingly, the RX 7600 starts to flex its muscles. It's almost 7 points clear of both the major contenders here. Thing is though that similar to the RT run, there is stutter, but it's Intel and AMD that are most affected, while Nvidia is smoother and more consistent overall. RTX 3060, B580 has the same 12 gigs of VRAM, and the Intel card is 18% faster. But well, once again, no XeSS support on this one, only DLSS and FSR, and while FSR does a job on this game, it's not that pretty. This is a modern title, I expect to see XeSS in it, but it's not. Black Myth Wukong, we had to add it to our benchmark suite, and rather than use the internal benchmark sequence, we've used the intro to the prologue, which is far more demanding on the GPU. An RTX 4060 win here, pulling ahead by 9 points over B580. Even the 2021 contender, RTX 3060, delivers 91% of B580's throughput, though the RX 7600 trails. B580 is 20% faster. Cyberpunk 2077. We couldn't use our RT benchmark because B580 has issues in this game when it's paired with an X3D processor, which is a bit of a shame. Still, here in Rasterland on Ultra, B580 is 23 percentage points clear of RTX 4060, 36% ahead of 3060, and it's the RX 7600 that's the runner-up here. Still, raster performance in this game on Nvidia is notoriously poor, but even so, it is what it is, which is a big B580 win. Not so in F124 with all the RT loveliness stripped out, however. Essentially, we've got parity with RX 7600 and RTX 3060, but the 4060 is 10 points clear. I mean, with frame rates this high, that's translating into a 0.7 millisecond per frame advantage on average for the 4060, which is hardly game-breaking, though some of the frame time blips there on B580 are hitting 20 milliseconds, which is noticeable. You'll also note that while we're benching the same content, in the moment comparisons vary. The GPUs are kind of jostling for position from one scene to the next. Forza Horizon 5 now, extreme settings, long shutter motion blur the way I like it, 8x MSAA for those ultra clean lines. We're not taking any prisoners here. It's a small 3.5 percentage point boost for B580 over RTX 4060, but that's 26% ahead of the 3060 and 13 points clear of RX 7600. And with a 93.7 FPS average, B580 is clearly doing great here. In fact, let's sneak a quick look at 1440p on the same settings and with the same 8x MSAA. A 76 FPS average. Yes, these are entry-level GPUs, but pick your battles and they can deliver great quality and excellent performance. And unlike some of the competition in this lineup, B580 is always above 60 FPS at 1440p extreme here. Let's move on to another new game in our suite, the beautiful Hellblade 2 Maxed. Unreal Engine 5, no holds barred, and typically the kind of game we wouldn't recommend playing at maximum settings without dynamic resolution scaling and a good upscaling solution as well. RX 7600 runs very, very badly here, far worse than it should be really, with some awful frame time issues, and I also note that the RTX 4060 has occasional lockup too. But looking at B580, Intel's latest is actually 10% ahead of Nvidia's current budget offering, with a 20-point lead over the RTX 3060. Hitman, World of Assassination next. 4060 is up there with RX 7600, both solid performers, while B580 pushes ahead with a 14-point advantage versus Nvidia's latest budget offering. It would be churlish of me to point out that the average frame time difference between 4060 and B580 is just 1.2 milliseconds on average per frame, but yes, it is another win for B580. A performance differentials become far more relevant in A Plague Tale Requiem though. 27 points, 27 percentage points ahead of RTX 4060, 49 points clear of the 3060. Basically, we're talking about a 75 FPS average on B580, while the others are in 40 to 58 FPS territory. I haven't really got any idea what's going on with the Plague Tale results on RX 7600 here. There can be severe stutter in this sequence along with generally poor overall performance, but the benches were rerun with similar results, and I can assure you that the RT result hasn't made its way in by mistake. Crazy stuff. Spider-Man Miles Morales though, something has gone badly wrong here, just as it did in the ray tracing test. I've tried both of the Intel review drivers, multiple tests, but it is what it is. Intel came out saying that drivers aren't an issue anymore, and by and large my testing passed without issue, but ultimately I'm only testing a tiny selection of relatively new games. So Cyberpunk RT not working properly with X3D processors, Miles Morales just not working correctly at all. I'd venture to suggest that maybe Intel still has some work to do. Since we now have easy access to power consumption metrics via the PCAT interposer, let's take a look. This is actual power draw measured from both the PCIe slot and the PCIe power input. Looking at a Plague Tale Requiem here, B580 outstrips RTX 4060 performance, as we know, but typically 4060 is in a 120 to 130 watt power range, while B580 is typically pulling 170 to 180 watts. So you're getting a lot more performance, but the power consumption is on a different level really. Performance problems with RX 7600 are reflected in variable power draw here. Something's not quite right. That said, as we've seen, B580 is also very rapid indeed in the non-ray tracing version of Cyberpunk 2077. RTX 4060 is still in the 120 to 130 watt range, but the power draw from B580 varies from 150 to 170 watts. So I find this quite interesting because we've all seen power metrics averaged across benchmark sequences, but the variation in the moment doesn't quite reflect what those averages might be telling you. The delta isn't consistent, right? Even more intriguing is this Alan Wake 2 visualization. Arc B580, in overall performance terms, it's very close to RTX 4060 performance, right? Actually, it's a bit faster, but the typical power draw seen elsewhere in other games is much lower on Intel, while staying pretty much where you'd expect from Nvidia. We've gone from 170 to 180 watt power draw from B580 in A Plague Tale to just 140 to 150 watts in Alan Wake 2, and I'd love to understand why. You'll also note that across the examples here, AMD with RX 7600 has also been pretty consistent in the 150 to 160 watt range, Plague Tale outlier apart. Final thing I want to discuss here before I wrap up, legacy game support. Intel has upped its game here big time since I reviewed the first Arc products. I mean, I'm probably one of the only people that still loads up Assassin's Creed Unity, and it was a disaster area on Intel Arc's launch, but Intel remarkably did fix it. But there were still some concerns. Let's have a look at Call of Duty Infinite Warfare, one of my favourite COD campaigns, after a shader compilation step that is inexplicably lethargic. I mean, we're talking about in excess of 20 minutes here. The game crashes when you start the campaign. Okay, it's an old game, but it's not exactly an obscure one. And I'd say that there's still driver work to be done on legacy titles. But I guess my concern here is that Intel just doesn't have the legacy support that Nvidia and AMD have. And I have to wonder whether it ever will. All told though, Arc B580 is a dream product in many ways. This is as close to disruption as you're going to see. A rare thing indeed in a mature market like PC graphics. Of course, we've been complaining for years about how stagnant the sub $300 GPU market segment is. We've been complaining about 8 gigs of VRAM not really being enough. We've not exactly been massively happy about gen-on-gen performance increases either. B580 is priced aggressively. The price versus performance ratio is best in class. Ray tracing is excellent. XeSS is very good. I'm just concerned about the lack of support there. And of course, Intel is now shipping XeSS2 frame generation. Hand on heart, I didn't have time to look at that in any depth, bearing in mind how quickly we needed to get this review together, but we'll take a look soon. In the meantime though, what can I say? Prior advice for this class of card was kind of like a grudging recommendation to get a 4060 if you have to, or pick up a bargain 3060 for the 12 gigs of memory. DLSS is such a crucial feature. B580 makes the decision process a lot more challenging, and let's put it this way, I'm not sure Intel could have done anything more. I don't think it could have done any better. The real niggle is just how far ahead Nvidia is with features. XeSS is great, but DLSS is better, and the support level for DLSS is untouchable. It's crucial stuff. Still, that's my review of the B580. It's great, and I've got a very good feeling about the B570 based on this, but for now that's everything I've got to say, or rather everything I've got time to say. Obviously I really want to do more in terms of the scope of our GPU reviews, but that's all from me for now. Like, subscribe, share if you feel so inclined, and ring bells for notifications and a likely algorithmic boost for Digital Foundry content on YouTube. A DF supporter program, let's get serious here. It's support that means we can invest in stuff like this brand new benchmarking technology. And in return, you get early access to content, early access to DF Direct Weekly, the chance to help shape the show and much more, including, of course, high quality video downloads of everything we do and have done since late 2016. Store.digitalfoundry.net is, as ever, our portal to our wondrous merchandising wares. But anyway, thanks as ever for watching and supporting Digital Foundry.